Very good afternoon. Right after lunch, we have two very esteemed visitors in the house. First, of course, is YB Rahman, as you know him. He is the Minister for Urban Wellbeing, Housing and Local Government, and very important guest whom we're going to talk about social and crisis monitoring today. And we have Arvind Gupta, of course. He is the Chief Head Honcho of Technology for Narendra Modi's really overwhelmingly great election in India. So I think it will be a very interesting session for us today. And of course, I'm from Brandwatch, and we do social media data and monitoring. Previously, I was the head of content at Twitter, so of course, social media is in my blood, I guess. Love that. So I think perhaps we should start off today with a few interesting questions for the different panelists here, just to understand on how their perspective is on social and what they love to do about it and everything else. So perhaps we'll start with YB Rahman and understand what is his favorite social media platform.
I'll go there. I've got a little bit of speech that I want to say.
Oh, all right. He has a bit of a speech. Fantastic.
Now, I was asked to deliver a little bit of a speech. Thank you, Crystal, and Mr. Arvind Gupta, and Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, and salam satu Malaysia. I'll start with a story. A couple of months ago, I was asked by my niece, who just entered womanhood, to show me a picture of her new boyfriend. And she answered me with a shrug, unfazed with me trying to encroach into her privacy, and said, "I'll Snapchat you." So I pretended I know what this Snapchat is all about, but at the same time I was fiddling with my fingers and scrolling Google to find out what this is all about. And I don't need to bore you, of course, the social media believers you are, about Snapchat. It's a mobile app that allows messages and videos to self-destruct a few seconds after it's being read. So I would rather have more time on Q&A, I suppose. That would be a better way to do this. But of course, from the point of view of the government, Malaysian government, amazing as social media and digital lifestyle may seem, it is actually the technological advances of the 21st century that have revolutionized the way we live and work. Geographical borders are no longer a hindrance. The speed of communication accelerates as we speak. I mean, it's amazing. I represent a very rural area in about 2 hours drive up north of Kota Kinabalu in the state of Sabah. It's a very rural area. And some of my officers will be tweeting this and putting it on my Facebook. And within a few seconds, the people in Kota Belud will be able to know what I'm talking about here in Cyberjaya. So that's how amazing it is. I remember when I went to school last time in the United States, in the 80s, in 1983, 84, I mean, there was not, what do you call that? There wasn't even email. I still remember it was floppy disk, and I had to communicate with my parents through, snail mail or, writing long letters and sending telegrams, So it's amazing. And then sometimes we were so craving for news that when a minister visited us with a Berita Harian, and giving us supplies of Berita Harian, the Star newspapers, or Utusan, we literally, berebut, we would be reading a sports section, one would be reading the entertainment section, one would be craving just to look at the 4-digit results, sports. And you know what? That Berita Harian was 2 weeks old. And so that's how we were so angry with the government, because there was not enough information. But now, it's just too much of information. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, Malaysians were Malaysians are actually, in 2014, we were the champion of WhatsApp global market, with 77% of mobile internet users in Malaysia subscribing to the messaging service. And that explains your battery drainage, which you pretend to know nothing about. And on top of that, according to a case study published by the international agency We Are Social in January 2015, our social media here in Malaysia, our social media use was number 9 in the world at 55% of the population. A year later, we leapfrogged to number 7, beating even the United Kingdom and trailing the United States at 57% of the population. Now, statistics apart, this is a phenomenon no government or political party can afford to ignore. I think all of you agree with me that social media, at whatever scale, has influenced the outcomes of the 12 and 13 general elections. And I am certain social media will remain a dominant player in our future elections. The sway of social media on politics is not unique, neither it is confined to Malaysia alone. I mean, 2 years ago, the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, swept into power by utilizing social media and technology to win over the hearts of 150 million young voters. Media and political pundits alike have termed the election as India's first social media elections. Of course, President Obama himself is also no stranger to social media. His 2012 re-election effort was claimed to be the most data-driven political campaign in history. He hired young minds in the fields of analytics and behavioral science to extract voters' data from Facebook, identifying swing voters and focus on wooing them. But while social media lends politicians with a competitive edge, it simultaneously poses formidable challenge to the government. Remember what happened in the Middle East, where social media was the impetus that caused Arab Spring. History was then made with the collapse of several key government leaders. And in the United States, social media has helped shed light on systemic police brutality against the African American community, prompting multiple racial riots in the southern states and the formation of the Black Lives Matter movement. All is good in the name of democracy and free speech. But here in Malaysia, we cannot deny that social media sphere is sometimes tempered with rumors and half-truths. The petty theft case in Lao Yat, for example, was racialized on social media. So much so that it had triggered a mini riot that mirrors the nation's darkest days in 1969. What then is our role? What can we do to differentiate between fact and fiction? Social media speed is certainly not for the faint-hearted, but one thing that can set you apart from the rumor monger: verification. Verify, verify, verify. Then only form your judgment. Nothing is gospel truth in this age and time. I'm not just talking, of course, about the opposition, even the government statements. You can and you should verify and verify again and again before you form your judgment. Now, personally, I've taken to social media to respond to pressing issues and questions that concern the general public. And oftentimes, I'm also required to counter ill-intentioned allegations on social media. And when emotion overrules good sense, I find myself on Twitter timeline engaging all and sundry. Sometimes I win, sometimes I burn. And I know it's brutal out there on Twitter. And last year, an online news outlet claimed that I advised people to wake up earlier in order to avoid paying tolls. In fact, I mentioned tolls was some sort of a trade-off. If road users want to save money on tolls, they would have to invest more time in using toll-free routes. So as soon as the article was released, the headline went viral. And to cut short a long story, I soon found myself to be at the receiving end of vicious attacks on social media. Now, while the conventional way of handling public relations crisis like this is to issue a press statement, and hold press conferences immediately, this method proves futile when everything is already too late by digital speed. So what's left for me to do? I responded to the bashing in a sarcastic and at times comedic manner. Lo and behold, I soon found out those criticisms were magically turned into constructive thoughts and creative ideas as the rage dampens. This instance illustrates the importance of ever-readiness on social media, as any issue, be it big or small, can erupt exponentially within a matter of seconds and minutes. And nonetheless, a quick response does not mean we have to compromise on the quality of our response. By the way, I did sue the news portal because of spreading half-truths and allegations which I did not say in my press conference. Now, one of the major hurdles for the government to counter baseless claims by irresponsible parties is often the need to gather adequate facts and accurate information, which inevitably requires some time. Now, this is a problem. A lot of people say the government should respond immediately. Well, I agree to that, but we have a little bit of limitation as far as the government is concerned. First of all, we have this notion that every statement that comes out from a ministry must be approved by the minister, or at the very least the Secretary General of the ministry. And that takes time. As you know, the ministers are all over the place. They don't have time to respond to issues within an hour or within 15 minutes. So we left it with the Secretary General. But then some Secretary General also have to, if they prepared the answer, they have to wait for the ministers to approve it. And when that happens, but finally when the minister approves it, it is too late. They have shifted the goalpost. By the time you answer, they move on to new issues which are equally bad for the government. So all I'm saying is that when it comes to official answers and dissemination of information, there is more than meets the eye for the government. Like I said, speed is not an inherent right for government in responding to internet-based allegations. Of course, matters like bureaucratic procedure, the divide between executives and the rank and file in the government will undeniably impede the speed in responding. But above all, the government must be seen absolutely accurate before answering. Now, this is another issue. Every statistics that we need to find to counter the allegation must be accurate and on the dot. So, despite the challenges faced by the government in social media, I still believe and I remain an ardent believer in free speech. But what is freedom? What if freedom of speech paves way to hate speech? A case in point, of course, the Charlie Hebdo tragedy in France has taught us aplenty. One of them is the freedom of expression must come with responsibility. Now, let's face it, there's no end to this conundrum. While one will say it's a free speech, there is always another who will scream it's indeed a hate speech. In Charlie Hebdo case, for instance, this hate speech has claimed innocent lives at the hands of extremists. So where do we draw the line? Now, taking this matter closer to our political debate at home, does this freedom of speech exist in Malaysia, or is it still largely a concept? Are we restricted to say anything we want to say on social media? Well, the last time I checked, semua orang kena. PM kena, Datin Sri Rosma kena, saya kena, KJ pun kena, Friends in the opposition too suffer the same fate. And prospectively speaking, when you want to accuse someone, for example, of stealing, you must first be able to substantiate your allegations. There is a fine line drawn between mocking and accusing. The government, and to a lesser extent, the politicians should consider seriously initiating legal action every time they face baseless accusation. This is not just to set the record straight, but also to demonstrate that we will not tolerate any form of misinformation which can cause havoc to peace, stability, and the economy. But looking back in retrospect, we are indeed free to say anything we want to say on social media or news portal. Though some segments featured in news portal are against journalistic ethics, they are still free to do so on daily basis. How could they just pick? I mean, I know one of my favorite news portal out there. They always use Vox Populi as their headlines. And, you know, it's not really nice to do that, because sometimes when people write in or comment, you know, they do so without much consideration. And by putting up that particular statement by your reader as your headline, I think it's a bit irresponsible. If you can imagine the Star, Straits Times, or Utusan, or Berita, or any of the mainstream papers putting up as headline, you know, letter to editors, for example, and say, you know, if you're not so sure, you still want to put it up and put a big question mark there, that is not really the right thing to do. So I believe that there is a lot that we need to learn. The government, given a chance, is not interested to regulate the internet. We know that it is an uphill battle, an archaic move, and it is technologically tedious to do so. It's a futile effort at times, but when push comes to shove, you can't blame the government from taking action, because not taking action is also unacceptable. So at the very least, the government must be seen as proactive. From Barisan Nasional's perspective, I intend to set up a team of lawyers and the funding to assist anyone, especially our MPs and our ADUNs, the Dewan Undangan Negeri, to initiate legal action should they feel that they are defamed or subjected to malicious allegations. We also have set up an entity called Fact Checked. It is here, headquartered in Cyberjaya. We've got the office up and running. Basically, what we do is to checkmate any statements made by politicians from both sides of the aisle, and then give a better perspective on what they said 1 year ago, 2 years ago, and how they contradict themselves in terms of statement. So this is probably a good way to elevate the quality of debate in this country from bashing each other every day on trivial issues to really go into substantive issues like policy matters. We want to know what is the economic policy of the opposition vis-a-vis the government. We want to know the social policies, the trade, the energy policy of the opposition vis-a-vis the government. So we need to elevate the conversation, the narrative, to be more substantive than all this daily bashing of each other over issues that are very subjective. So I believe we must ensure that if Lim Kok Wing can help me, I realized this, that one of the challenges to prove in a court of law in this country, when you bring a defamation suit, for example, is when you try to prove that a headline of an article is actually carries a lot of weight in this country. People don't read the entire article. Just by reading the title of an article, they will form their opinion. And a lot of times in this country, some news organizations use very defamatory headlines, which had nothing to do with what the minister or the government or the opposition members of parliament said in their press conferences. So I would like to suggest, if possible, Lim Kok Wing, for example, to come up with a study. Is it true Malaysians, and how many of them, believe a certain issue just based on reading the title of an article? This is a very interesting statistics to know, because in UK, they did a study, and that helps anyone who brings to court any articles that have been seen as defamatory to them, by saying that there is a study done by a respected third party saying that even titles of articles can play a very important role in determining the opinion of the readers. So maybe Lim Kok Wing, together with your organization, can help us, find a real study do a real study and find out whether Malaysians actually form their opinion just by reading the headlines. So when we have a conclusive evidence, then we can tell the news organization, please be more careful in writing your titles or your headlines. So that's all I want to say. I will reserve some of the time on Q&As. So to drive the point home, of course, insofar as social media is concerned, you are what you share. So you got to rise above mediocrity, read extensively, and please verify vigorously. So I wish all of you a successful summit. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this working? Is this working? Okay. I think next we have Arvind to deliver his presentation on how the Indian elections were mainly engineered and, of course, amplified through the use of innovative technology. So, Arvind.
Yeah, mostly my presentation actually today is on crisis management. So, but I can draw from my experiences with the election, which I also shared last year. But the topic that the organizers gave me today was to talk a lot about response, recovery, and situations of crisis. I'm in a situation of crisis right now because what all I had to say, a lot of them have been laid out by Datuk over here, and I need to innovate very fast. And when I start my presentations, I need to acknowledge Bhaskaran from the social media chambers and Ken, who helped me put this together. So thank you for doing that. I want to start by saying, we are always in a crisis. It depends on what you define as a crisis. On social media, there is a crisis happening every hour. And some crises are worth responding to. Some crises are crises that are being created for the sake of attracting response. Those are called attention-seeking techniques. There are many sorts of crises. Where and which crisis do we need to respond to, and how do we determine is very important. The other thing, if you all attended the session on policies and police, they talked about you need to have a standard operating procedure. You need to have policies. But at the same time, social media, digital media is all about being yourself, having a lighter note, playing out who you really are. The challenge is, in crisis, everything that you say in a lighter tone will be held against you. This is the golden rule, by the way, of Twitter. Anything that you ever say in a lighter tone will always be held against you sometime in the future. And that is very, very important, because you can't, I've learned from my own experiences, you can never diffuse a crisis by being on a lighter tone. Now, this is the fundamental paradigm of social media: listen, engage, respond. And that's where the origin of how do you identify crisis starts with. If you have great monitoring tools, the great listening power on social media, you will be able to correctly identify your crisis. And monitoring tools are plenty today. You need good sentiment analysis. You need to understand who is saying what they are saying on social media. And that determines the level and the priority of that crisis. And that will really determine how you should respond to it and who should respond to that. I will come to that how the response mechanism in social media is determined by how you respond, what you respond with, but most critically, who responds to that, right? The minister explained that, there is a procedure. When you have a response, somebody higher up approves that response. That's one part of the operating procedure. But who communicates that response? Is it a spokesperson of the ministry or the minister himself or herself? That's very important. Who speaks that language out? And that depends on the level of crisis that you are in. If it's a crisis which has a natural part to it, if it's a crisis, a lot of people are impacted by it, you would expect a more senior person coming out and talking about it. And social media is no different. You need somebody who is at the top to own the crisis and lead it from the front. And that's a critical mistake a lot of people make. The second important part, so the social media has listen, engage, and respond, and I will keep referring to this when I move forward. What are the types of crisis? There's a real-world crisis, the natural crisis as we know it. Tsunami warning, I'll use that case. You know, you have tsunami warnings. We had a tsunami warning yesterday when some of us speakers were meeting before we had a speakers dinner last night. Is that real? What all happened in that 30 minutes when the tsunami warning came out? That's a real-world crisis being amplified by the digital world. How do you respond to that? There is an online-only crisis, and these crises, what I refer to, happen every hour. There's somebody or the other doing a misinformation campaign, doing starting an online war, misinterpreting information. There are tons of this, and I think this is the real. This is where you have to separate the chalk from the cheese. You have to understand which are these attention-seeking techniques that you don't want to respond to, you don't want to engage with, whereas what are the real ones that you want to engage with. And of course, these are misinformation campaigns. What the minister talked about, the headline grabbing. The headline will communicate something else, and the content will be absolutely different. Content will be absolutely different, and it happens every day, in every part of the world, right? One line that you speak will be taken out of context and will be put out there. So this is very important that the misinformation campaign is also nipped in its bud. And of course, it's a reputation crisis. Brands and people personally face this a lot. Credibility crisis, reputation crisis. How do you determine this? How do you determine this? How many of you here represent a brand or a government organization? Or an organization. How many of you are individuals, or how many of you represent an organization over here? Anybody? So all of you rest are all individuals? I'm assuming it's 0 or 1. Either you work for an organization or you are individual. So how many of you are part of an organization? Can I see a raise of hands? Very good, almost 50-50. How do you identify a crisis? That's the question you need to ask yourself. When you make those standard operating procedures, those policies, what says it's a crisis? As I said, there was a tsunami warning that happened yesterday. There was an earthquake close to Sumatra, and then there was a tweet that was sent out which said, possible tsunami warning. The word possible was not looked at by most of the media reports. Where I come from in India, it became a tsunami warning, and nobody knew whether it's for real or not. And for the 35 minutes that the warning was out there was panic in the affected areas. In those 35 minutes, if you work in an organization that is supposed to respond to that, which means you are the local fire brigade, you're the local evacuation teams, the disaster management, police force, the law enforcement, evacuation teams. What do you do with that? Do you respond? And plus, who is responsible for that response back? And whose response will people take as authentic? And that is the critical decision. In that 35 minutes, that information was out there, it became too long. Somebody has to respond to it very, very quickly. Fortunately enough, in this crisis that happened yesterday, there was a retraction by the same set of people who put that warning out. But otherwise, media has to act very responsibly. They have to use their digital assets to calm people down. The government has to act very responsibly. The local government has to act very responsibly. And that's where you have to be so prompt, because a natural disaster like this, 35 minutes can be too long. So in that, separating that misinformation and a real crisis has to be done very accurately and very fast. What also should not happen, if it's a genuine alert, it's a genuine tsunami alert, that you say, no, there is no alert happening. So the information has to be absolutely verified. Because if it happens again in the future and your information was incorrect, either ways, either there will be a huge loss of life or people will not believe you are credible. So I think the verified information is so critical in this. And that's where the standard operating procedures that you have, making sure you have a unified command center, and we have the next session on the command center that I'll get to. On the second, the online and the misinformation campaign, monitoring tools helps a lot. Simple alerts, simple sentiment analysis tools, big data analysis are very, very important. Now, a few things from my learning in this is to make sure that you know if these alerts that are coming up are from people who are generally impacted or are from bots. And today's advanced data analytics tools help you separate the two. Bots are computer programs which are creating noise, right? The fake accounts or the bots that people refer to in other sessions. Now, secondly, if there's a misinformation campaign, if there is a set of people who always do that, you know that they are running that. So you can identify, the way you identify your influencers, you also should identify people who talk negative always, or who are the troublemakers, as they're called on social media. And if they are spreading wrong information, you know how to handle that in a separate manner, and I'll explain that. But what is important is to figure out that if this campaign that is coming up is generally a misinformation campaign or a real crisis. And if it's a misinformation campaign, it also needs to be handled correctly. And that's where a lot of organizations, especially government organizations, a lot of brands actually make this critical error. They don't respond. They say, oh, this is running a misinformation campaign. We don't need to respond. No, you need to respond if the misinformation campaign is being run by a genuine consumers, who are doing it without knowledge maybe, who are doing it without any wrong intentions. They're doing it unintentionally. You need to make sure that the information is corrected, because it finally can result into a crisis. Again, if you are running a unified command center, if you are responding to crisis of any sort, please make sure you have good monitoring tools. You have a big data analytics. You have analytics which tells you, information that is coming from every consumer. You can read those tweets which are open in public space. You can analyze what's happening on Facebook across platforms. And no human being can do that. You need huge analytical capabilities. At Twitter, you was telling me 65 million tweets got generated in a period of 40 days around the Indian elections. That's almost 1.5 million tweets a day around the elections as one topic. I mean, you cannot analyze that volume without any sophisticated tools. So we use a lot of tools to make sure that whenever there was any information being generated every half an hour, we were on top of that information. We knew who is generating it, with what intent, and how to respond to it. And it was so real time that as a case study, it was a 24/7, 360-degree, both communication and response campaign. Campaigns were completely in real time. Crisis management is also a campaign. You have to be 360 degrees, which means use all tools possible and use big data analytics. The second thing that you need to own using big data analytics is who are your supporters? Who are your influencers, both good and bad? You need to have that data ready with you. It's all data driven. If you don't have the data, you will never be able to respond to it in real time. Because in those 35 minutes of tsunami, you need to know who are the people you need to reach out to so that they become your influencers and your advocates to make sure your story goes further. Otherwise, it will take too long to identify them at that point in time. Crisis response. These are some of the golden rules of crisis response. For those of you who are in this business, please, it should be led from the top. It's a big crisis. The CEO of the company, the CEO of the ministry, whosoever is a minister should stand out there and respond to the crisis. They have to own the crisis. The management should own the crisis before the crisis owns you. That's another big thing. People don't own the crisis. You should own the crisis. If crisis is happening, it's a time to go out there, show your face, show your compassion, and I'll talk about that. It's very, very important. And the third point is even bigger. Social media fire should be put out by social media water. Somebody taught me this. I have learned it from somebody else. That if the fire is happening on social media, on digital media, don't try to use traditional media to address it. Use traditional media also, but primary response has to be social media. And within social media, a lot of people make this mistake. They are only on one platform, on Twitter only. Twitter is good because it's an open platform, so media, other people follow you. But understand where your audience is. If your audience is primarily on Facebook, then make sure you're engaging with them on Facebook. If it's on Instagram, make sure you're engaging them with on Instagram. Don't leave out platforms. People leave out platforms a lot. They leave out and they concentrate probably only on Twitter. It's a wrong strategy. In times of crisis, you have to make sure you reach to your audience as fast as possible. And I talked about this. To be prepared for a crisis, you can't just say, today there's a crisis and I'm prepared for it. You have to develop your platforms. It's data, data, data. Unless you have your data about which platforms, what is the reach. If you have a Twitter account and it has 1,000 people, you're not going to, it's not going to reach a lot of people. So to be prepared for crisis, you need to engage before that. To start building on your platforms, you need to have your platforms ready, your people ready, and your data ready, your reach ready. The people play a very important role. The biggest lesson I have learned in crisis management or positive communication is that your people are your biggest source. Your Twitter account can only do so much. Your likes can only do so much. It's your people, whether online or offline, that are going to advocate that, become your spokesperson on TV, become your spokesperson on Twitter, on Facebook. That will actually amplify that message, will take it forward. And if they don't see the leadership coming from you, they're not going to take the cue. To give them the right cues, you need to be engaging with them, should not use them only at the time of crisis. You should be engaged with them on a constant basis. They should trust the information coming from you. And once they trust the information coming from you, you will see if your people, volunteers, or whosoever they are, they can do wonders for you at a time of crisis. They can really be your soldiers out there. And these soldiers generally don't cost a lot. The currency for them is information. If they get the right information at the right time, they will always act with you, for you. Have a response strategy ready. That's a standard operating procedure. I always talk about that. Have a standard operating procedure. Be transparent and swift. I don't need to say that, but the transparency is very, very important. Don't delete, don't deny, don't delay, and don't deny. It's important to say that you don't know, because the rumors will be out there. If there is no information about a particular issue, say that you don't know yet. You're determining the information. But be out there communicating that. Because in the absence of any communication, there is miscommunication. And I think the biggest mistake people take, there's a fine balance you have to strike between verifying information and delaying information. If the verification is taking so long that you're not able to come out, it's better to come out and start communicating. It's a very, very thin balance, and it can only happen over time that you will learn that technique, but it's very important. Don't delay. Don't give wrong information, but don't delay. Don't deny, be out there. And of course, never delete. That's a fundamental mistake, I believe, because Twitter has elephant's memory. Social media has elephant's memory. You think you have deleted it? Oh no, it never goes out there. It's always there. Somebody has taken a screenshot, and they will keep reminding you forever. don't ever delete. Right? You can delete if there's a factual error or something, somebody has made a grammatical error and things like that, but if there was a wrong information put out there, deny the wrong information. Don't delete the tweet, for example. A lot of people think deleting the tweet meant they have taken back that information. No, it's incorrect. At the time of crisis, as I said, it's very important to show the brand's compassion, or the people compassion that you have. Come out and show empathy. Show that you know what you really feel. A lot of people think if they come out and start owning a crisis, they get painted in the wrong picture. That's absolutely a no-no. It has to be led from the top. You have to own the crisis. You have to show the compassion. If it's a crisis that has human impact on it, you have to show compassion. It's very, very important. This is probably my last slide, but what I want to say here is very important. Don't forget, once you have responded to the crisis and the crisis is over, it's not over yet. Keep engaging with people. Have a constant engagement going on. A classical mistake people make is, crisis is over, phew, let's go home. We're done with. For the next 2 days, we don't know. We can go and sleep. Yes, but you need to hand over the baton. It's a journey. It's a marathon. And in this marathon, you need to make sure that, there is the people who contributed to resolving the crisis are acknowledged. There's an engagement with them. There is, if there is any bits and spikes coming on, you still keep dissolving any wrong information that is out there. It's very important to keep the constant engagement going on. Keep your social media monitoring going on, that, if there are bits and spikes. Sorry, I promised the previous one was the last one, but I think this one is important because it leads to the next session. To do all this, the critical need is people, data, and a command center. Command center, without the right infrastructure, right capacity, right monitoring tools, technology, it will not work. You need the command center. And I know the next section is about the command center, so technically this was for the next session, but I want to leave with that. Great crisis management, any response and recovery always should happen where the left arm and the right arm are sitting in the same room. They're not sitting in so many distant places that they don't know what's happening. And that's the biggest mistake that happens. In any crisis response, the left, right, whatever other arms exist, they actually don't know what they're doing. You need the command center, a unified command center that is there, that takes charge, and actually whatever happens, good or bad, is done by the single command center. So that unified command center is the key to any crisis resolution, response, and recovery. Thank you very much.
I think this doesn't work. Okay, it works now. Okay, well, thank you very much. And I think that was a very good summary of what crisis response is and command center related knowledge. So I think we're just going to move on to some questions and, of course, to reflect upon some of the key topics that both speakers have outlined in the previous sessions that they've talked about. So perhaps I think the first question is for YB Raman. Should I just call you Raman? All right. Raman, my good friend, come. Now let's share. What is your favorite social media platform? Easy one.
I actually, I'm on all the media social platform. I have a Twitter account. I got Instagram. I tried Snapchat. I got Quick. Was it Quick? Yes, there's the Quick. And of course, Facebook. Now, where I come from, Sabah, Twitter is not really getting traction. Of course, Facebook is always king there. So we have our Facebook and Twitter. So at the moment, only three. Of course, WhatsApp and Telegram is there, but I'm talking about Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. But I've always been a Twitter guy. Yeah, 140 characters, you really need to be a little bit on your toes just to make sure that you've been understood within 140 characters. So that's a challenge. Yeah. Then I do all the minding my own accounts. Oh yes, yes.
Sorry, I think my clip-on mic is not working so well. All right, so I think that's an interesting one because I think Raman had mentioned earlier that a lot of Malaysians read different articles online and the headlines are the first things that they see. So perhaps Twitter is an interesting way across all platforms for us to just communicate in less words and with more clarity. So the tweet is the new press release, right, from every single person. So I think that's very crucial. Interesting. So I think what is your experience then, personally for you, Arvind? Like what is your favorite way of communicating with, different audiences in India? I mean, Brahman has mentioned that Twitter is not so popular in Sabah, but what about you?
See, again, it depends on if you have to interact with the media, with a lot of influencers. Your previous employer, Twitter is the right platform. But it depends. Facebook has a different utility, and the new generation, I think, is on all on Instagram. So, which is also owned by Facebook indirectly or directly. Actually, they own it now. So it depends, but I am more active personally on Twitter. I find Twitter to be the right tool to engage. My ID is Buzz in Delhi, so I tweet what I like, and it's an interesting platform.
Okay, that's good. So today when you get back home later, or maybe just right now, follow both of them on Twitter. Okay, that's a good one. So I think with the rise of chat networking, social apps, for example, like WhatsApp, like the one that you mentioned just now, Telegram. So how do you see yourself engaging with your future voters using these platforms?
Okay, this is I'm going to make a statement. The next wave will be on WhatsApp or WhatsApp / WeChat. I mean, probably in that part of the world there is no democracy, but the elections are going to be influenced a lot by these instant messaging tools. The penetration of these instant messaging tools is more than Facebook and Twitter combined. And the virality of content is so high that the reach and virality is so high that, for example, in a country like India, just to give you some perspective, India has 820 million voters, out of which 570 million people voted in the last election. 570 million, that's twice bigger than any other election in the world. Okay, so, and today, world's biggest market for WhatsApp is India.
Yes, it is.
So, I think the next set of elections, especially in India, countries like India, will be on WhatsApp.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Even in Malaysia, I think WhatsApp is gaining traction. And I realized lately that people don't type anymore. People just, when they receive messages, and they put all the messages in the form of infographics. People just don't go and read anymore. So yeah, it's very fast. WhatsApp group is also the best way to viral issues, even for the government. So I think, but the government in Malaysia is still not serious on WhatsApp yet. They talk about Twitter, they talk about the traditional websites, and of course Facebook, but nobody really look into WhatsApp yet because they think that it's still a personal choice. But what Arvind is saying is true. The next election, I think, will be decided by WhatsApp. I agree completely.
I think it could be an interesting idea if, let's just say, for instance, in the future elections, right? 2018 for you, and I think the next one would be in a couple more years, right?
2019,
2019, yeah. Well, pretty close to each other.
Yeah.
You could have easily some brand ambassadors with their own WhatsApp accounts per district or per, county, per village, whatsoever, right? Just actually helping to disseminate
Crystal, I'm not going to
information.
discuss election strategy over here.
No, I'm just putting out an idea because different brands are doing it, and every single organization could be looking at different communication
No, I'm
strategies.
just joking because that's a very, we have to. The strategy will evolve over time. Yes.
No, I think that's a good question. So I think moving on as well, I think both gentlemen have highlighted as well how they would like to respond to, communications and also messages on social media. And I think what Raman had mentioned as well is that he prefers a more proactive approach than a reactive approach. And of course, having a team and him coming out to actually really respond to messages himself is an interesting way for him to really connect with real issues and real voters, right? So I guess moving on to you again, what is the most interesting experience you've had in this whole course of communication so far?
I had a very long conversation with a guy over some issues, and almost an hour. I could not resist of answering him on Twitter, and I realized he was only 14-year-old. And my father was a YB in the 70s, and people could not see him just like that. I mean, they would probably write a very long poison letters, mail it from another city just to attack him. But there I was, for 1 hour and a half engaging someone, and I do not know where this. I realized I found out that he is just a 14-year-old boy, but he was just asking tough questions, and I had to answer every question because we've been followed by everybody else. So that is it's amazing to know that you could actually engage a 14-year-old boy, and you don't even know where he comes from. He could be from some isolated village in Pahang or in Sarawak, or I don't know, and doing something that, probably tweeting with you with the minister while he's in the toilet, So the level of access to ministers and government officials is increasingly critical in this country, and we need to really engage them head on. Yeah, that was a very interesting experience for me.
And I think back to you, what do you think of that? And what is a similarly interesting experience for you on social in that regard?
In general on social media?
Yeah, just communicating with the electorate, and Raman have pointed out the
See, I think the biggest experience is on social media is that you meet a lot of people, and for example, I have more than 100,000 people who follow me. But suddenly, some people who have been tweeting to you, writing to you, you meet them in person. There is no feeling like that. And the 6 degrees of separation rule that you had in real life, actually it becomes 2 to 3 degrees in social media. Because you suddenly find that you have so many people in common that you know and things like that. So meeting people through social media is very real. The big myth I feel I have personally broken on social media, I separate between bots and fake accounts. People used to doubt the genuineness of your followers because they said they are fake. There are a lot of people on social media who are afraid to write things, but that does not mean they are fake. So they will never be writing, they're just always, consuming information. And it was a pleasure to go and actually see them and meet them. So I think that's been my high on social media. The other high on social media really is how today the real world media, the mainstream media as I call them, actually follows social media. You can put out 2 tweets, and 4 or 5 of us put out tweets, it actually can become a story for them tomorrow. So I think that's the convergence of social media and mainstream media.
No, I think that's a very good point because as I've said before, right, the new press release is a tweet from anyone, right? And the mainstream media can pick it up and put it as the new headline, or they can put it as a new story, or they can identify it as a new trend. And I think that's quite crucial to think
Crystal,
about.
can I add over there?
Yes.
I'd like to put my own headlines.
That's a good idea.
I like to put my own headlines. So when I put out a press release, I indicate what the headline should be with the link to the full press release, so that my friends in the media get the idea and they don't build their own headlines.
Yeah, but that would be easier if you do a press statement. So you could actually control the content of your press statement. But in Malaysia, you're being interviewed as you walk out of a room. A reporter will just shove a microphone in your face and say, can you comment on this? So you do have to make some impromptu comments on current issues, and that's when the pitfalls are. You end up, hey, I didn't say that, and then when you ask them to make amendments, sometimes they're quite reluctant, thinking that it will pass. So I learned my lesson. So on issues that I think is quite crucial to the integrity of my ministry, I'm looking seriously on legal issues, while engaging them and asking them. One of the things that I wanted to say just now, but I didn't have the time, was the self-regulating body for a council, for example, for media social news portal in this country. What they should do, they should quickly form a self-regulatory body among themselves, among their peers, and try to understand the limitations and parameters of the environment that they work in. And come up with your own, self-regulation, so that the government doesn't have to come in and regulate you.
I think it's all about just having responsible reporting, right? Because if you're just spreading lies and misinformation, that is not good for anyone or the country in general. I think that's really crucial. So I think, in general sense, so what are your other ideas of how you want to use social to re-engage with your audience and your followers, this year? Let's just say this year.
Yeah, well, as far as my ministry is concerned, we're coming up with apps that we hope people will download on their phone, and hopefully will be able to interact with the government and getting the right information correctly and fast. One of the things that we wanted to do was to come up with an app called Orang E, or Orange. Orang means people exchange. We try to monetize your skills and your passion, your hobbies, so that you can earn extra income. This is not a second job. I'm not asking people to take a second job. I know another colleague of mine was ridiculed for suggesting that people should take the second job. No, but what I'm trying to say is that try to monetize something that you love doing. If you like to cook, for example, for people, how do you monetize that? In a very limited way. You don't want to open up a restaurant, but hey, if you can cater for, let's say, a birthday party of 20 packs within your condominium, it's so easy to do and earn some income. Why not? So that system will be able to match the demand and supply within the set parameters.
I think that's a very good idea. I like it. Orang E, orange. Very nice. So what about you, Arvin?
I think, see, the social media, digital has always been about, giving the information out first and making sure people you interact with trust the information that is coming from you. But going forward, to do something new, as I said, I would like to build the kind of response strategy that we have on Twitter and on Facebook for WhatsApp. Because I think the world is going more and more mobile. The consumers are going much more mobile. Citizens are going much more mobile. So, can I build responses coming to a WhatsApp channel and respond to them, and do things like that, which today we do for Twitter or for Facebook. So I think that's where the future is, and that's what we need to build for going forward.
Yeah, I think the trend has been from long-form content like blogs and all that to short-form content on social networks and now micro-social amongst your very close friends and family on chat networks, I think.
Yeah, and you see the video size has reduced from a 10-minute video to a 2-minute video to now 6-second videos, right? I mean, the highest consumption of videos is 10 to 15 seconds. So people's attention spans are reducing so much that you need to catch their attention in a very short while. And, to answer the ministers, to actually amplify what he said, that infographics, why infographics are getting popular is because people want to see that information and pictorially they understand it, consume it faster than they do it reading a text message. So I think the world,
isn't it?
yeah. Well, it's a new generation. Whether we can be scared or we can be embraced, we can embrace that, right? But that's the new generation.
Yeah, and I think a challenge lies in opportunity, right? To really go out there and be the winner before anyone else does it. I think that's more crucial.
The other thing, as far as politicians are concerned, I think it's very interesting that you are able now to talk to people. As I mentioned to you before, when I respond to some, you don't know who they are. And it's very interesting for you to be able, I pick and choose sometimes. If somebody asks me tough question, but there is an element of intellectualism behind that question, I will engage them, and you'll be surprised that sometimes they've got good ideas and, in a way that even though they are criticizing the government, but if they've got some ideas, I picked up so many ideas from Twitter because it's very fast. And translate that into some adjustment to my ministry's policies.
I think just to add to what the minister said, it's very, very important to take positive criticism and ignore negativity. But there is a difference between negativity and positive criticism, constructive criticism. And I think my unsolicited advice, Minister, you are doing the right thing by taking positive criticism, because that's where real feedback is. Your supporters will always keep clapping for you, but your real meat is the people who criticize you and give you good suggestions around it. So, yeah.
That's true, because I think in the online world, right, there's a lot of keyboard warriors and a lot of negativity that is unnecessary. And I think addressing the ones that are right, constructive criticism, I think, is more important at the whole for anyone, pretty much. Yeah. I don't think I have any more questions to ask per se, but
From the audience.
yeah, from the audience, right? So I think the audience can ask questions. So yes.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good afternoon. I have a question. I think both YB, Haji Abdul Rahman, and also Arvin or even Crystal can answer this question. Two questions actually. One will be, with the numbers of social platforms, especially in mobile apps, all right, how we as either corporate or government segment, and then pick up the right one to prepare and prevent or even deal with the crisis. I'm representing travel agency. Secondly will be how to prepare time management. Is that based on situation or how? Thank you.
I think to clarify, one of your first question about
Platforms.
Yeah, what platforms are you talking about?
I mean, with the numbers of social media platform that grows, now my company focus on 3: Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. All right. So what are the things? I mean, to follow and due to the numbers of future or current crisis that may be spread out through different platforms, either WhatsApp or I don't know, Snapchat. So how we actually pick up the right platform for us to deal.
As far as the government is concerned, I think a lot of it will be on website. I know it's still archaic way of delivering information to the people, but some ministries, some departments are still, can you imagine, depending on website to disseminate information. So I've told them no. They got to go to Twitter or Facebook. Of course, in this country, I think Facebook is still rules as far as media social is concerned. It also depends on the language that you use. Sometimes you want to explain that in Bahasa so that it is well spread and known to people. Sometimes you need to do it in English because for some reason, English is is an easier communication language. For you to express yourself in 140 characters, But as far as I'm concerned, as I mentioned to you, kalau Sabah, Sarawak, it will be Facebook. And Twitter is for the urban voters. But the good thing, of course, you can link everybody else. You can post your tweet, and then and then link it to your Facebook. So really, you have to cover all bases, I think. But I think language also is very important. Someone was telling me about time. I know what you meant, but whether it's a time-based or what. But I'm just talking about time in terms of time of the day. My colleague, Elvisa, keeps saying to me, it's the lunchtime crowd. Go for the lunchtime crowd. No point for you to go and debate with someone at 12 midnight. No one's listening to you and you're just wasting your time. So yeah, timing also is very, very good. As far as the government is concerned, really there is no rule. As long as the crisis appears, then you have to come in and do your stuff.
Can I just add to what the minister said? Crisis, to prepare for the crisis is one response I will give you. But for the current crisis, if you have a crisis, you have to use the platform to whom you are addressing the crisis to, right? My answer would be to make sure it is omnipresent. It's 360 degrees. It goes on all platforms for the current crisis. For the future, I think you have to see which your audience is. If your audience is more and more on now going forward on Snapchat and on WhatsApp, then you need to build your audience there. You need to make sure that your broadcast messages are reaching there, right? And start building for that. But it's all based on on who you're communicating to. If you're communicating to the end consumer and the end consumer is on WhatsApp, then you need to build your audience on WhatsApp.
I mean, it's also interesting. Not just that, I think even in terms of geographical location. For example, there are issues which are only pertinent to Penang, for example.
Absolutely.
You don't want to waste your time and explain this nationally. So I think apart from what Arvind was saying in terms of platforms, also in terms of geography, is also very important. Otherwise, you'll be talking about issues that are only concerning my constituency, which nobody wants to hear in Kuala Lumpur, you see.
No, what the minister said is absolutely correct. If the issue is local, that's where the data counts. If you're responding to an issue which is about, and I gave you the example of a tsunami alert. The tsunami alert where I come from in New Delhi it really doesn't impact me because I am not in the tsunami area. The tsunami area are the coastal areas. So I need to make sure my voice, my communication has reached those areas. And if it is, if it's a Penang issue, then it should reach Penang. By putting it out in KL, you're hoping it will reach Penang. But best is to reach Penang directly. That's always my advice.
I think that's a good summary. I think local communications, but with a countrywide scale, is important. Okay, any other questions from the audience?
No questions, we are on time.
Wow, we are on time. Excellent. All right, so I think thank you very much, YB Rahman and Arvind as well, for your valuable time today, and definitely a lot more to discuss. Thank you.